afternoon, everyone. This is indeed a very exciting topic. And as Sunil said, Sunil and I have been in conversations for the past 2 years on and off on various topics related to the proposal that he mentioned with the Engineering Research Center and the National Science Foundation. And we were in the midst of Miamidade County with some exciting work that Debbie, Nicole, and others will share with the 100 Resilient Cities and the Rockefeller Foundation. So we found it a real good fit to be able to engage in those conversations. My job today is going to be to try to open up this conversation, which is somewhat cryptic, right? It's a very difficult conversation, quite subjective, and I'll make an effort to hopefully demystify some of it, but also throw my perspective or the way I perceive it, with the intention that there's no right or wrong, but the intention that as we get into the workshop and we get into the breakout sessions, it'll help facilitate, have a greater conversation. So the question on the table today, the workshop today, is obviously water governance. And the big thing, if you look at it from a very high level standpoint, I look at it in two different paradigms, right? If I just look at governance from a standpoint of governance, then what comes to mind is how do we manage water? What are the regulations? What are the policies? Water rights? And all the different stakeholders that manage water within their jurisdictions, within their domains. In some places, yes, we've got collaborative approaches. In some places, we don't. So that thought comes to me from a supporting standpoint. From the work I do in my day job as the Deputy for Capital Improvements and Resiliency, my emphasis, my focus, my goal obviously is to try and get this operationalized, right? How do I get governance systems into operational systems so that there could be better decisions in terms of outcomes? And there are expectations, there are political expectations, there are community level expectations, and I think it's important that we keep that in mind when we try to connect the governance with the outcomes, whether those outcomes could be green infrastructure, could be projects, specific ordinances that need to be passed, and how does that data and information go back and forth. So that information, to me, that binding glue between governance and outcomes, to me, that is data, right? Because somehow we have to demystify and connect governance systems and conversations with outcomes, which is at the end of the day, the most important. So when we say, if we agree, again, this is all conversational, in the breakout sessions, there might be more dimensions to this. So if we agree that data is that binding force, then obviously we do understand that if you have good data, good reliable data, it will lead to good funding opportunities because we would have somewhat of a collaborative approach at a regional level or a local level to be able to undertake projects that could be operationalized. But that also means that we would be able to optimize the time it takes to yield those results. So funding becomes a little bit much more justifiable wherever that might reside. And then the time it takes to operationalize these projects, at the end of the day, our goal is obviously to make sure that we have resilient systems, resilient outcomes. So if you take it down a little bit further from that conversation of governance, I broke it down maybe into these four, there could be more. We talk about equitability in water use, water availability, and how it is available to communities at large. We talk about the efficient use of water, right, from an economic aspect of it. We also talk about equal opportunities for decision making, right? How these water rights actually then, translate into opportunities for different communities. And then finally, of course, the sustainable aspects of water. Now, if you look at it, each of those boxes, whether it's equitable, efficient, equal, or sustainable, each of those boxes can become, again, very subjective if we do not have sound data behind it to be able to make sense out of it, to be able to communicate what that means to the various stakeholders that might be governing each one of those boxes. So that is the reason I feel that at the end of the day, if you talk about governance and you talk about if these are the pillars of governance, then data again plays a more specific role in it. And some of the speakers after me will be talking about it with respect to some of the technological aspects they bring to the table and how some of these decisions can be made better. Now, when you look at it from a catchment standpoint, like Sunil was talking about, there are catchment interventions and then there are some special services. For instance, When you look at the circles in blue, you look at it from a water resources standpoint, we look at it from planning and green infrastructure, retrofitting urban systems, buildings, and then of course, all of the rivers and waterways in between, right? So there's a whole system that resides between these from a catchment perspective. And then when you look at it from a service perspective, there's asset management, smart infrastructure, and from sensors and so on and so forth. And then all of this obviously has to be integrated, because if they work in their own little domains and own little silos, we are still not making an impact in terms of connecting the dots. So now, if you talk about governance, why are we even doing it? Why is it even important, right? And we all know, those of us who work on the operational side of systems, we all know we are talking about resiliency. And we talk about resiliency in the system from a standpoint of shocks and stresses. And they could be human, biological, geophysical, or technological. Each of them, we know what they mean, could be a failing pipe, or a hurricane, or a fire. Most recently, we have been talking about biological systems. We're talking about COVID-19. We are seeing that the virus continues to remain there for some time. This is a topic of research in wastewater. Now, what if scenarios can play out from here, right? What if you have leaky pipes? What if it goes, if the sanitary sewer is in open bodies of water? What if there is human exposure? What if there's exposure to operators if we don't govern those systems? So you all of a sudden see the far-ranging connections and implications between various systems, and therefore the layer above resiliency, then if we have to act fast and we have to make decisions quickly, not only does it become important for us to understand the definition of resiliency, but it's also important for us to have a layer above it in the form of governance that we can quickly come together, not necessarily just to have a meeting or whatever, but to bring some system of structure to it in the form of governance, so that we work collaboratively to achieve that same end goal, because we saw that the ramifications could potentially be far-ranging other than just a linear approach to say, well, we have a leaky pipe, let's go and fix it. In the context of Miamidade, Nicole and Debbie and Dr. Walsh will be talking a little bit more. We were fortunate to be a part of the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities. This is just to give you a snapshot to get your minds thinking in terms of how complicated the system can be in terms of the various stakeholders and the various systems of water that we manage. And this is just a depiction, but we will delve into this more in detail as we go through the future presentations. So Sunil talked about One Water, and to understand the water, One Water, obviously we need to understand the value of One Water, right? And we know that all forms of water has value, right? So, but at the same time, and this is a slide that I've taken and I use it very often from the US Water Alliance. Many of you might have already seen this. Now you start looking at each of those numbered boxes, whether it's thriving cities or sustainable systems or healthy waterways. Again, there is subjectivity in it. And I want to bring home the point to say, well, while all of that is good, and while we understand that all forms of water has value, whether it's water, surface water, groundwater, or canal water or drinking water, we've got to make a point that we connect those conversations, which we are currently maybe managing in silos. And when we talk about thriving cities, what does it mean? What are the metrics? What is the data behind it? And how are we being consistent in the measurement of thriving cities, let's say in a region? If we say that water is a regional resource or a national resource, it's not just, it doesn't have boundaries. If you follow the life cycle of water, right? So it becomes then critical again to say, we look at it from different lenses. We all manage water from our own different lenses. And for no right or wrong reason. We have a job to do on a daily basis, and therefore, we are working within those domains. Unfortunately, we run the risk of having different perceptions. Again, no right or wrong, because we are managing those resources for what we have been assigned to govern. Having said that, again, I want to bring home the point of data. And while we know that data exists, not all forms of data might be reliable, and not all data might be needed. Not all data is good data, right? So we all know that we collect a lot of data. 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is created every day. And by the year 2020, there's going to be probably 200 billion smart devices. So more data doesn't mean anything. It's how are we going to deal with data? Fortunately, there's some saving grace. And at the end of the day, as we go through this conversation today, while we have data, while we have great technological solutions, in order for people who are working in these individual silos who eventually will come together, hopefully under this governance structure, to be able to make conscious, good decisions that are reliable, insightful, and actionable, we need to make sure that there's some good governance around data. There's data discipline. And if at the end of the day, we always talked about the descriptiveness of decision-making or the diagnosticness, predictiveness or the prescriptiveness of data. All of those things are great terms, but if we don't have that discipline, we run the risk of garbage in, garbage out. And that can be even more damaging sometimes. So if governance systems have to work together, we need to make sure that we have to professionalize and institutionalize all of these data systems residing in those different jurisdictions across the entire catchment, the way it exists today. Okay, something happened here. Okay. Okay, so the saving grace here is that a ton of work is happening across the board in the data analytics space. We are talking about cloud computing today. We are talking about edge computing. We are talking about going away from those massive servers that could become victims of all kinds of security functions, right? So there's a lot happening out there, and I think the speakers after me are going to be talking about it. How can we improve those communication systems between the governance and the stakeholders? How do we demystify the complexity of data, providing on-demand services so that you have some sort of a real-time actionable insight and you're able to make things happen, a stitch in time saves 9 concept, and pay-as-you-go approach, right? When you're using this data, because it costs time and it costs money and resources in order to put systems like these in place as well. So we have to put this into the context to say, if governance systems, stakeholders, jurisdictions have to employ these kind of technological systems, how are we budgeting for these features? It's not enough to just put sporadic technological features to say, well, okay, now we have data, so we are in better shape. We've got to start budgeting for adoption of these technological innovations in the field of data and data governance. And now if I take you down again to my utility level, right? What I'm trying to drive home the point here is, if you look at systems at a regional level, which might make up of several utilities or water jurisdictions within the region, then each region might have a bunch of tools which are depicted on the left side. In our case, we've got SCADA and GIS and all these systems. Then there are people in the middle making decisions, and there are some specificities depending on the jurisdiction or entities you're dealing with. In our case, we define capital projects. They better have good outcomes that are measurable and then connect to that entire one water realm that we showed a few slides ago. We need to optimize operations to save money, to make unmet needs, and to make sure that we are nimble and adaptable and agile, and all of the above, right? So each system and jurisdiction will have to do this, so that when we conglomerate all of these conversations at a regional level, then there is a greater level of reliability in those systems. Within Miami-Dade County, Nicole and Debbie will talk about the work. I just wanted to depict some excellent work that has been done in the field of governance. We are not there yet, but I think we've taken some strides, and I'm just excited to share some of the work down the road. On the left side, non-professional associations, non-governmental organizations, we work very collaboratively together. We all have our own little jurisdictions. I think the challenge on the table for all of us is, how can governmental organizations come together? What would that take? Does it take some sort of a charter? Does it take some sort of a legislation? I don't know the answer to that, but I think until we have some defining glues, it might be still a conversation that might not be easy. And then finally, I think, while we do all of the work, whether it's under the ERC, the proposed ERC, or local, regional, national levels, it's extremely critical for water professionals and water communities to then align ourselves with state goals or national goals or even international goals. And an example would be that if we're doing certain work and we are developing certain systems or achieving some specific results, then how are we aligning ourselves to, let's say, one of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, right? And so it needs to be a top-down, bottom-up approach where we are drawing all these insights from the top, but we are also making systems improved and better on this path of continuous improvement so that we are able to vertically align to these bodies and organizations and goals above us. And I think that takes me to my time, a minute ahead, Sunil.